Vivian Aldridge was the picture of quiet elegance as she stepped into the courtroom. 7 months pregnant, her hands trembled over the gentle curve of her belly. Across the aisle, her husband's mistress, Marissa Langford, flashed a triumphant smile that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. No one could miss the tension. It was so thick, it practically rattled the windows. This was supposed to be a simple hearing, but as friends and onlookers crowded onto the wooden benches, whispers spread like wildfire. People wondered how it had come to this, what secrets were about to explode into the open. Little did they know the truth was about to shake everyone's world. Vivian Aldridge had grown up dreaming of a picture-perfect marriage. She was raised in a small coastal town in Maine. She was the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher mother and a boat mechanic father, neither wealthy nor truly poor. Her family instilled in her strong values, respect for elders, honesty, and unwavering loyalty. In many ways, these ideals shaped her understanding of what marriage should be. But those values were shaped not just by warmth and stability. Vivian's childhood, while loving, was not without shadows. Her father once lost his job during a difficult winter, and though he masked his despair well, Vivian would sometimes hear quiet arguments behind closed doors, see the exhausted lines in her mother's face as she cooked dinner after teaching all day. She learned early to keep the peace, to bear the emotional weight of others in silence. That sense of responsibility, of never causing trouble, had followed her into adulthood, becoming a part of her instinctual response to conflict. She believed in sacred vows, in the promise of fidelity, and the strength of mutual support. When Vivian met Richard Aldridge at a charity gala in Boston, it felt like something from a storybook. Richard was the heir to the Aldridge fortune, a family known for wealth built from shipping, real estate, and more recently, tech ventures. Richard himself was a striking man, tall, dark-haired, and gifted with a genial smile that disarmed even the coldest hearts. He was the kind of man who opened doors, ensured everyone felt comfortable, and wrote generous checks at charity auctions. Their courtship moved at lightning speed. After their first date, Richard flew Vivian to San Francisco for dinner at a 5-star restaurant. Though Vivian found it overwhelming, she was also drawn in by Richard's kindness. He listened closely whenever she spoke about her dreams, her plans for the future, her small-town roots. In turn, Richard opened up about his life. His father had passed away young, leaving his mother to manage the Aldridge empire. As an only child, Richard learned to navigate corporate boardrooms by college. He told Vivian that he hadn't experienced real love, true love, until he met her. Within a year, they were married in a grand ceremony at the Aldridge estate. Guests marveled at the floral displays lining the aisle, the sparkling chandelier in the courtyard, and the vintage Bentley that whisked the newlyweds away. Magazines featured photos of the radiant couple in their society pages. Vivian wore a breathtaking lace dress that made her look every bit the princess, and Richard's mother, Eleanor Aldridge, embraced her warmly, sensing in Vivian a steady grace she believed could balance her son's occasionally extravagant lifestyle. For a time, it was bliss. Vivian felt like the beloved wife she had always longed to be. She moved into the lavish Aldridge mansion, a sprawling estate boasting 14 bedrooms and 10 bathrooms. Each wing housed priceless artwork, from Renaissance paintings to abstract modern sculptures. Walking the halls, she would catch glimpses of Richard, returning from business trips or hurrying off to meetings, often filled the halls, and when their eyes met, the tenderness between them still flickered, something that once felt like it could last a lifetime. But beneath the polished surface, the pressure was building. The Aldridge empire was growing faster than ever, and Richard found himself constantly juggling meetings across multiple states and even overseas. He spent more and more nights away, returning drained, sometimes distant. Vivian tried to be understanding. After all, she had married a man who bore the weight of an entire legacy. So she adapted, stepping into the role of the supportive wife at fundraisers, galas, and high society events, quietly waiting for Richard to carve out time for them. But deep down, she began to feel like a well-dressed shadow in her own home. Every event she attended alone, every evening she dined by herself at the grand oak table, chipped away at her sense of connection. She missed his laughter, the way he once held her hand without needing a reason. Now, silence greeted her more than words did. She began to keep the lights on in the hallway at night, not for safety, but to make it seem like someone was still coming home. As months melted into years, the glow between them began to dim. Their conversations shortened. The demands of Richard's schedule tightened around them like a vice. Vivian, ever gentle, suggested they slow things down, maybe take a weekend at a quiet coastal cottage. Richard always agreed in theory, but inevitably, some crisis would erupt and their plans would vanish. And yet, Vivian stayed resolute, clinging to the values she'd been raised with: patience, faith, and perseverance. So when she finally became pregnant nearly 3 years into their marriage, it felt like a divine gift. She prayed the baby would draw them closer. But the fractures in their relationship ran deeper than she had allowed herself to see. The rumors started around her 3rd month of pregnancy. At first, they were barely whispers. One afternoon at the racket club, a friend gently pulled her aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Vivian, slightly confused, offered a polite smile and nodded, unsure why the concern lingered in her friend's eyes. Then the whispers grew bolder. At a hospital fundraiser, Vivian overheard 2 women chatting near the champagne table. One of them said in a hushed voice, "I heard Richard Aldridge was spotted at that upscale new lounge downtown. Not alone." The other quickly shushed her, eyes darting toward Vivian as she approached. The words unsettled her, but she tried to brush them off as idle gossip, the kind that circulated constantly among the wealthy. After all, Richard had never given her real reason to suspect anything. Yes, he'd been distant lately. Yes, more preoccupied. But talk of infidelity? It seemed absurd. That evening she approached him delicately with the rumors. He dismissed them with ease, blaming the chatter on jealousy. People who envied the Aldridge name and wanted to stir trouble. Vivian nodded. She told herself she believed him. She needed to believe him, especially now, carrying their child. But that night, long after Richard had fallen asleep beside her, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The room felt colder than usual, her thoughts looping in silence. What if the rumors weren't baseless? What if her instinct, the tightness in her chest each time he looked away too quickly, wasn't just anxiety? The fear didn't scream, it whispered, and it made her doubt herself more than him. She clung to the idea that the whispers were just the product of idle minds, spinning tales for amusement. But as the months passed, it grew harder to ignore the changes in Richard. He spent more nights away, claiming work obligations. His phone calls were shorter, and he often stepped out of the room to take them. On the nights he came home, he appeared uneasy, like he expected her to confront him, and exhaled with relief when she didn't. And Vivian, afraid to push him further away, told herself not to pry, not to accuse, not to give in to doubt. She reasoned that loyalty meant silence, that love meant endurance. But in those quiet evenings when she sat alone feeling the baby move within her, she sometimes questioned if she was holding on to love, or simply to an idea of what love used to be. By the 5th month of her pregnancy, she noticed something else, something far more painful. Her friends at social gatherings began treating her differently. Women who had once been warm now offered only tight smiles. Some avoided her eyes completely. It was as if they knew something she didn't. At a charity brunch, she felt it most clearly, an invisible wall of pity surrounding her, isolating her. She found her old friend, Danielle Mercer, seated stiffly beside her, a familiar face from their college years. Danielle seemed to choose her words with care. Finally, she cleared her throat and asked quietly, "Are you sure you're all right?" The question held more than casual concern. Vivian tried to muster a convincing smile, but her voice trembled as she insisted she was fine. Inside, though, the sense of foreboding only deepened. The truth revealed itself one evening. Wrapped inside a single envelope, Vivian was just over 6 months pregnant. It was the Aldridge family's longtime head of security, a man named Gerald Marks, who approached her discreetly. Gerald had served the Aldridges for decades, a trusted fixture who viewed it as his personal duty to look out for Vivian as well. With a regretful glance, Gerald handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Richard in a dimly lit booth, leaning in close to a woman with vibrant red hair. Vivian would soon learn her name, Marissa Langford. In the picture, Marissa's hand rested on Richard's knee, both of them smiling in a way that left little to the imagination. The setting appeared to be a sleek, upscale lounge that had recently opened in Boston's Seaport district. Vivian felt her heart plummet. She asked Gerald how he had come by the image. He explained that it was taken by a paparazzo who had planned to sell it to a gossip column, but Gerald had managed to intercept the sale just in time. He wanted Vivian to have the truth privately, to spare her the public disgrace and give her space to process what came next. Vivian clutched the photo in silence, her tears barely contained. She stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile this version of Richard with the man she had loved, the man whose child she was now carrying. Her mind raced. Was this just a moment of weakness, a brief affair, or something far more serious? How could he betray her? Now, of all times. That same night she confronted Richard. There was no time for subtlety. She stood in the living room, holding the photograph between them, her eyes glistening. Richard froze. The color drained from his face. For a long moment he didn't move, just stared at the photo in stunned silence. When he finally spoke, his words stumbled out clumsily. Yes, he had been seeing Marissa. Yes, it began not long after Vivian became pregnant. He was ashamed, he claimed. It hadn't meant anything. He tried to explain himself. He felt overwhelmed, trapped between his corporate responsibilities, the approaching reality of fatherhood, and the immense weight of the Aldridge legacy. Marissa had been an escape, a temporary release from the pressure. It wasn't love, he insisted. Just a distraction. A mistake. Vivian felt like the foundation of her life had crumbled. Everything she believed in, the trust, the future they planned, was unraveling before her eyes. She told Richard to leave. That night, he packed a small overnight bag and moved into a penthouse downtown. Vivian didn't speak to him again for the rest of the week. Meanwhile, her mother-in-law, Eleanor Aldridge, tried to intervene, urging her son to repair the marriage. But even Eleanor's pleas couldn't undo the damage. Despite the heartbreak, Vivian soon realized she needed to protect herself and the child she carried. She began exploring her legal options. Divorce was daunting, especially with the Aldridge fortune on the line. The idea of a drawn-out, scandal-ridden trial unsettled her. But trying to force Richard into some hollow imitation of a marriage felt even worse. There were nights Vivian lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, wondering how her child might one day ask about the marriage that had fallen apart before they were even born. The thought pierced her like a quiet grief, one she wasn't ready to speak aloud. During this turbulent time, Vivian received a handwritten note delivered by courier. It was signed simply, M. Langford. It read, "I'm sorry for everything, but you deserve to know the truth. Meet me. Marissa Langford." Confused and torn, Vivian hesitated, but the need for clarity won out. She agreed to meet at a quiet cafe far from the public eye. When she arrived, she spotted Marissa already seated at a corner table, wearing large sunglasses that partially concealed her sharp features. Marissa took them off and offered a tight smile. She began with an apology. Vivian didn't speak at first. She let Marissa talk. Marissa explained that Richard had been the one who pursued her. She was working as a marketing consultant, and her firm was trying to land Aldridge Holdings as a major client. Their interactions began professionally until, after a late-night pitch meeting, the boundaries blurred. Marissa claimed she tried to end it, but Richard pleaded with her. He said he felt trapped in his marriage. He called Vivian cold, distant, and obsessed with appearances, lies. Marissa admitted now seemed absurd, especially after meeting Vivian face-to-face and seeing her pain. Vivian gripped her teacup tightly. Every word sliced through her carefully maintained composure. She wasn't sure which part hurt more. That Richard had been unfaithful, or that he had rewritten their history into something so unrecognizable, so unfair. Vivian's chest tightened. The idea that Richard would describe her like that to anyone felt not just cruel, but cowardly. She told Marissa that there was never a shortage of love or warmth in their home. Marissa's expression shifted, from regret to something harder, like realization, as though she too had been deceived. Before leaving, she insisted the affair was over. She said she would remove herself from the client account and break off contact. But it wasn't over. That same week, tabloids published photos of Richard and Marissa entering a luxury hotel. The headlines were ruthless. Billionaire betrayal. Vivian watched the coverage from the safety of her bedroom, tears soaking her pillow. Eleanor Aldridge frantically called in lawyers, desperate to salvage the family's image. Richard offered no explanation, no excuse for why he had lied. The whispers were now front-page news. Vivian tried to stay composed, for the baby's sake. But the stress was taking its toll. Her blood pressure spiked and her ankles swelled. Her doctor warned that continued emotional strain could complicate the pregnancy further. Alone in the doctor's office, hearing those words, Vivian felt a shiver of fear she hadn't known she was holding. It wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about the life she carried, the tiny flutter she felt each day. The child didn't deserve any of this. She leaned on Danielle Mercer, her oldest friend, her anchor. Danielle answered late-night calls, listened to Vivian cry, vent, spiral. She urged her to hire legal counsel, immediately. Enter Jonathan Ralston, a high-profile divorce attorney with a reputation for tearing apart anyone who crossed his clients. In Boston's legal circles, he was legendary. He'd once dismantled a tech billionaire's entire financial facade in court. Vivian met him in his tastefully minimalist office. She felt a mix of intimidation and quiet relief. Ralston was tall, with silver streaks in his hair, and the calm authority of someone who knew exactly how this kind of story unfolded. "Mrs. Aldridge," Ralston said gently, "you hold significant moral ground right now. The public is on your side. But the Aldridge family has deep pockets and strong influence. They won't hesitate to protect Richard, and they may try to damage your image in the process." "Are you ready for that fight?" Vivian hesitated. She didn't know. A part of her still hoped Richard might come to his senses. But another part, the louder part, only felt betrayed. Over the next hour, Ralston walked Vivian through her legal options: separation, joint custody after the baby's birth, and a potential alimony arrangement. The conversation was cold, clinical, but essential. By the time she left his office, Vivian knew that whether she liked it or not, the life she once had was gone. She had to move forward. After days of quiet reflection, Vivian filed for divorce, citing infidelity. Despite Richard's late-night calls and his desperate claims that Marissa meant nothing, she stayed firm. The final wound came when Marissa appeared on a daytime talk show. Her eyes glistened with tears, but her tone was sharp as she implied that Richard had planned to leave Vivian months before. She painted herself as the woman Richard truly wanted, the one he'd sought while stuck with a wife who, she claimed, was cold and joyless. Watching the clip, Vivian felt her chest tighten. It wasn't just betrayal, it was public humiliation. Marissa had taken her heartbreak and made it entertainment. When the day arrived for the preliminary court hearing, the media swarmed the courthouse. Paparazzi crowded the entrance, shouting questions. Vivian, dressed in a simple black dress, walked steadily up the steps, her 7-month pregnancy unmistakable. Camera flashes burst like fireworks, capturing every falter in her step, every flicker of pain. Richard arrived moments later in a black town car, looking drained. Marissa was with him, bold and unapologetic in a designer coat and heels, oozing confidence. The sight of her clinging to Richard's arm left the crowd murmuring. There was no more hiding, no more shame. Vivian's pulse quickened. Rage, betrayal, and heartbreak surged all at once. Inside, the courtroom buzzed as the judge addressed early matters: spousal support, temporary living arrangements, visitation plans once the baby arrived. Despite the hearing being just a procedural step, the atmosphere was tense. Shockingly, Marissa had chosen to attend. She sat beside Richard, whispering to him, smirking now and then across the aisle. At one point, Vivian caught her leaning in, lips close to Richard's ear, no doubt ridiculing the process. Midway through, the judge called for a recess. Vivian stepped into the marble hallway, needing air. Her body trembled, her chest tight from the strain. That's when Marissa approached. The corridor was quiet, save for a few reporters and onlookers lingering on benches. Marissa's voice was low, venomous. "You should have taken the money and left quietly," she hissed. "Or do you actually think you can keep a man who's already bored with you?" Vivian's cheeks flushed. Confrontation had never been her strength, especially not like this. But today she couldn't stay silent. With calm resolve, she replied, "I suggest you stay out of my way. This isn't your relationship to destroy. It's mine, and if you had an ounce of decency, you'd feel ashamed." Marissa laughed, loud and deliberate, drawing attention. Ashamed? Please. James came to me. You're just the pregnant wife he's trying to escape. Vivian's vision blurred with fury. Her knees weakened beneath her. Then, just as she thought she might collapse, a court clerk called out, announcing the session would resume. Marissa turned and strutted back into the courtroom, her chin high. Vivian followed, every step heavy with rage and pain. During the next break, Eleanor Aldridge approached her. Worry lined her usually poised face. She took Vivian's hands, voice trembling. I'm so sorry, dear, she whispered, eyes filling. You must believe me. I never approved of what Richard has done. This whole affair has been a nightmare. Vivian believed her. Eleanor had always treated her like family. I don't know what to do, Vivian admitted, her voice trembling. I feel alone and humiliated. Eleanor squeezed her hands tightly. My son is a fool, she said bluntly, but I beg you to think of your child. Our family stands behind you, not behind that woman. Vivian gave a faint smile. It warmed her, knowing someone from Richard's side still cared. But not even Eleanor's support could dull the pain. There were moments when Vivian wished she could shut her eyes and rewind time. To a life before betrayal, before she had to carry both heartbreak and a child in the same fragile body. The realization that her once loving husband was now a stranger weighed heavily on her chest. As the hearing resumed, each side laid out their initial arguments. On Vivian's behalf, Ralston pressed for comprehensive financial support, including Richard covering medical expenses and the child's future needs. Richard's legal team, clearly wanting to avoid more media fallout, signaled openness to settlement but balked at the proposed figures. Then everything exploded. Marissa stood up, uninvited, and insisted on addressing the court. Though the hearing was meant strictly for Richard and Vivian, her presence had always been a disruption. Now it was chaos. Marissa claimed to have valuable insight into the marriage, and the judge reluctantly allowed her a few words. What followed felt like a punch to the gut. Marissa painted a bleak picture of a cold, loveless relationship. She implied that Richard had been forced into fatherhood. Gasps rose in the courtroom. Vivian's eyes brimmed with tears, not just from the blatant lies, but from the way the crowd seemed to absorb them. She sat frozen, unable to defend herself in that moment, as if the very air had turned to ice around her. The injustice of it, being vilified while carrying the weight of loyalty and life, stung in a place words couldn't reach. Judge Harriet Delgado, known for her no-nonsense courtroom, raised a hand to silence the room. Her gaze locked on Marissa. You are not a spouse, Miss Langford, she said firmly. And your opinions about this marriage are not relevant. Unless you have factual evidence regarding financial or legal matters, I advise you to remain silent. Marissa opened her mouth to protest, but the judge's glare shut her down. The room fell back into tense quiet. Vivian exhaled, grateful at least that someone saw through Marissa's tactics. Outside the courtroom, rumors spread rapidly. Some whispered that Marissa was pressuring Richard to push the divorce through quickly so they could marry. Others speculated she was chasing a piece of the Aldridge fortune. Vivian was far less concerned about the gossip than the questions keeping her up at night. Would Richard fight her for custody? Could all this stress hurt the baby? She found herself waking in the middle of the night, her heart racing, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. Sometimes she whispered promises to the unborn child, vowing that no matter how messy the world outside became, she would protect them from it. Then, unexpectedly, Richard, through Ralston, extended a settlement offer. It was generous, a sizable lump sum, full ownership of a luxury condo in Vivian's name, and ongoing child support. But there was a catch. The offer came with a non-disclosure clause. Vivian would have to agree never to speak publicly about the affair, or the details of their marriage. In short, hush money. A means of protecting the Aldridge family name. Vivian stared at the paperwork, hands trembling. Accepting meant financial security. Stability for her and the baby. But it also felt like erasing the truth. She worried refusing might lead to a dragged-out legal war. Still, after careful thought, she declined. I won't be silenced, she told Ralston. Not for any amount of money. She wanted accountability, not a payout meant to whitewash betrayal. As if things weren't already spiraling, the final blow came in the form of a phone call. Danielle Mercer's voice trembled on the line. "Vivian, have you seen the tabloids?" The headlines screamed from every newsstand. Two heirs to the Aldridge empire, alongside a grainy photo of Marissa leaving an OB/GYN office. The story spread like wildfire. What began as a scandal had now become a twisted love triangle. 2 women, 2 pregnancies, 1 man. Richard offered no comment to the press, fueling even more speculation. Vivian felt sick. She was already battling exhaustion, anxiety, and isolation. Now she faced the unbearable possibility of Richard fathering another child at the same time. With the very woman who had mocked her now in the headlines, Vivian needed answers. She confronted Richard in a courthouse hallway before their next scheduled hearing, ignoring the pack of reporters swarming just outside. "Is it true? Is Marissa pregnant?" Her voice trembled, eyes glossy with tears. Richard pressed his lips together, hesitating. "That's what she told me," he finally admitted. "I don't know if it's true. I haven't seen anything. She says she's a few weeks along." Vivian's stomach dropped. If Marissa's claim was legitimate, the legal and emotional mess would deepen tenfold. Would Marissa try to stake a claim in the Aldridge fortune, possibly even overshadowing Vivian's rights? Would the child she carried now have to compete with another heir? She felt her pulse in her ears, a rising sense of helplessness curling like smoke in her chest. It was as though every step she had taken to hold her world together was unraveling faster than she could catch it. The next day, a whirlwind of legal maneuvering erupted. Marissa retained a high-powered attorney, signaling her intent to secure her own financial peace. She publicly claimed that Richard was the father of her unborn child, and she too would hold him accountable. The media had a field day. 2 pregnant women, 1 wealthy adulterer, and an empire up for grabs. Richard looked increasingly overwhelmed, caught between 2 storms of his own making. Vivian tried to harden her heart against any leftover compassion for him. He had made these choices. Now he would have to live with them. Still, seeing him hollow-eyed and unraveling stirred something painful. She wondered, just briefly, if anything could ever be salvaged. Then she remembered the betrayal, the public disgrace, the lies. No, there was no going back. As the weeks passed, another major court date arrived. Judge Harriet Delgado summoned all parties for a formal hearing to address spousal support and eventual custody. Though not directly involved, Marissa appeared again, insisting she had crucial information about Richard's finances and behavior, details that could impact child support calculations. It quickly became obvious. Marissa was not there to support justice. She was there to tear Vivian down while building herself up. Ralston presented a thorough breakdown of Richard's net worth, backed by filings from Aldridge Holdings, real estate records, and financial statements. He argued passionately that Vivian, as Richard's legal wife and the mother of his soon-to-arrive child, was entitled to a meaningful share of resources, especially given the emotional harm caused by his infidelity. Richard's legal team attempted to downplay those emotional wounds, steering the court's attention towards strict financials. They were eager to wrap up the spousal support issue before more headlines hit. Then, Marissa asked to speak. Though not officially a witness for either party, she argued her pregnancy gave her standing. The judge reluctantly allowed it. What followed was a spectacle. Marissa painted Richard as lavish and doting, showering her with gifts and taking her on luxury getaways. She described their relationship in glowing terms, making him seem like a man devoted to her in ways he never was to Vivian. She also alleged that Vivian had never been affectionate, claiming the Aldridge marriage was a shallow front meant to preserve the family's image. Vivian sat frozen, hands clenched, shaking with fury and grief. She gripped Ralston's arm. "We can't let her get away with this," she whispered. "Trust me," he murmured back. "This will backfire." As Marissa rambled on, she turned visibly cruel, taking potshots at Vivian's emotional state. She mocked her tears, suggested she was just putting on a show to win sympathy. At one point, she even smirked, saying, "Let's not pretend she's the only pregnant woman here who deserves Richard's support." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Vivian sat stiffly, her cheeks burning with shame. Her hands instinctively moved to her belly. She needed to stay calm for the baby. But inside, she was crumbling. The weight of the room's eyes, the bitterness of being turned into a spectacle, it pressed down on her chest until it felt like she couldn't breathe. But a wave of nausea and dizziness overtook her. Her vision blurred. Just then, Judge Delgado slammed her gavel sharply. "Miss Langford, I will remind you to keep your statements relevant. Personal attacks on Mrs. Aldridge are inappropriate and will not be tolerated in this courtroom." Marissa shrugged, her lips curling into a smug smile. "I'm simply stating the facts, Your Honor." It was a moment that would make tabloid headlines for weeks. The mistress publicly taunting the pregnant wife. But for all her bravado, Marissa had no idea that her next words and one critical question from the judge would unravel everything. After her drawn-out diatribe, Judge Delgado leaned forward, her expression calm but piercing. "Miss Langford, you've made many statements about Mr. Aldridge's marriage. You've also claimed you are carrying his child. Is it correct that you have not yet submitted medical documentation confirming this?" Marissa blinked, clearly caught off guard. She hesitated. I haven't shared my medical records with the court, if that's what you mean. But I am pregnant, and I fully intend to hold Richard accountable." The judge nodded slowly. "Yes, of course. However, given the serious nature of these proceedings and the high-profile status of the individuals involved, the court requires verification." She continued, her tone sharpening slightly. "It is not uncommon for claims of pregnancy to surface in high-asset divorce cases. So let me ask plainly, have you provided official documentation to confirm either your pregnancy or Mr. Aldridge's paternity? Or are we still relying entirely on your word?" A hush fell over the courtroom. Marissa's poise faltered. For the first time, she looked unsure. "It's early. I haven't wanted to go through invasive testing yet. But Richard knows." Judge Delgado did not relent. "Miss Langford, I'm sure you understand the legal implications of making a false claim in court. If you are unable or unwilling to provide proof of pregnancy or submit to paternity testing when possible, your testimony on this matter will hold little weight, and if this claim is found to be fabricated, you may face consequences for perjury." Marissa's eyes darted to Richard, then her lawyer, seeking a lifeline. But none came. This was the moment everything cracked. The judge's demand for proof stripped the veneer off Marissa's narrative. In the days that followed, tabloids that had once glorified her now raised questions. Was she stalling? Was she lying? Some claimed she was using the pregnancy to gain leverage in court. Others speculated she might be pregnant, but with no proof that Richard was the father. Even Richard admitted to Vivian that he was beginning to doubt her. He said, rather sheepishly, that Marissa had been behaving strangely, complaining of morning sickness, refusing to let him attend appointments, making odd demands. With pressure mounting, her story began to collapse. Then, on the morning of the next hearing, Marissa's lawyer stood up and made a terse announcement. "My client wishes to withdraw her previous statements regarding her pregnancy at this time." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Reporters typed frantically. Vivian felt a mix of emotions. Relief, of course, that this woman's lies wouldn't overshadow her own pregnancy. But also fury, that Marissa had tried to weaponize such a deceit. Judge Delgado's disapproval was evident. While she refrained from pressing perjury charges, she sternly warned Marissa that any further falsehoods would be treated with the full weight of the law. That day, Marissa Langford left the courtroom with her head lowered, no longer the smug interloper gloating at the expense of a broken family. The mistress's disgraceful exit didn't solve all of Vivian's problems, but it did shift public sympathy solidly in her favor. She was now viewed not just as a betrayed wife, but a dignified woman who had endured cruelty with grace. The media began portraying Marissa as a manipulative opportunist, and Richard's legal team scrambled to contain the damage. The Aldridge name had taken a serious reputational hit. Eleanor Aldridge continued to offer steady emotional support, pleading with Vivian not to cut the family off completely. As the final divorce hearing approached, Richard reached out. They met in a private mediation session, just the two of them, accompanied by their attorneys. He seemed sincere, humbled. He admitted that his pride and weakness had torn their marriage apart. He accepted full responsibility for the child Vivian carried and promised to be present in the child's life, if she would allow it. Vivian listened, tears in her eyes, quiet. She wondered where this remorse had been months ago, before the headlines, before the lies. Still, his words lightened something in her chest. There was relief in hearing Richard finally acknowledge the pain he had caused. Though her heart remained deeply bruised, she chose civility, for the sake of their future son or daughter. When the divorce was finalized, Vivian received spousal support and a trust fund was established for their child. She left the Aldridge estate, moving into a modest but serene home in a quiet Boston suburb. Tabloids caught photos of her leaving, calling it the symbolic end to a scandal-ridden chapter. Per Ralston's carefully negotiated agreement, Richard visited occasionally to help prepare for the baby's arrival. Their conversations were civil, though tinged with sadness. He mentioned that Marissa had disappeared, whether she'd found another benefactor or simply retreated into anonymity after her deception was revealed. He wasn't sure. Vivian didn't care. That chapter was closed. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Vivian went into labor. It was late, and she found herself in the hospital, gripping Danielle's hand as nurses worked around her. Eleanor Aldridge rushed in, tears on her cheeks, offering comfort. Even Richard arrived, quiet and unsure. Vivian, overwhelmed with pain, could barely acknowledge him. After hours of labor, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Sarah Ann Aldridge. When Vivian held her daughter for the first time, peace flowed through her. She had been ridiculed, betrayed, and broken, but in her arms was new life. A quiet miracle that proved healing could grow from devastation. Richard stood beside her, gazing down in stunned silence. For a moment, the tension between them softened. He leaned forward and whispered to the baby, "I'm sorry." Vivian didn't know if the apology was meant for the child or for her, or perhaps both. But she kept her eyes on Sarah's serene face, full of endless possibility. In the following months, Vivian embraced her new role as a single mother. She found joy in the little things, feeding Sarah, singing lullabies, strolling through the neighborhood park. Eleanor visited often, doting on her granddaughter, bringing gifts and tenderness. Richard's visits, arranged through their attorneys, became opportunities for him to bond with Sarah. At first he fumbled, unsure, tentative. But slowly, Vivian saw glimpses of the man she once loved, no longer arrogant but humbled by fatherhood. Meanwhile, Marissa Langford faded into the background of public memory. Her name occasionally surfaced in gossip columns with reports of her spotted in far-off locales, but her notoriety had dissolved. The once arrogant mistress who mocked Vivian so publicly had destroyed her own credibility by lying about a pregnancy. Judge Delgado's direct question had unraveled the deception, leaving Marissa with nothing to stand on. Vivian's healing took time. She eventually returned to work, drawing on her background in public relations and charity event coordination to land a position at a nonprofit foundation. She focused her efforts on helping disadvantaged women, many of whom had faced hardship, though often in very different ways. Their strength gave her strength. Financially, she remained stable thanks to the divorce settlement, but she chose a simpler life, in line with the values she was raised with. She wanted Sarah to grow up valuing truth, compassion, and resilience, not seduced by the hollow glamour she'd once chased inside the Aldridge estate. Several months later, Vivian received a surprise invitation to a charity luncheon from none other than Judge Harriet Delgado. She felt both honored and curious. Why would the judge who presided over such a difficult chapter of her life want to meet her socially? At the elegant downtown restaurant, Vivian found Judge Delgado seated near a sunlit window. The judge greeted her warmly and explained that she was spearheading a charity initiative to assist single mothers navigating legal challenges. She remembered how dignified Vivian had remained throughout her trial and hoped she would consider becoming a spokesperson or advocate for the cause. Vivian felt moved. She thanked the judge not just for the invitation, but for the fairness she had shown in court, especially the moment she demanded proof from Marissa Langford. "That question," Vivian said quietly, "might have saved me and my daughter from even more pain." Judge Delgado smiled. "Sometimes justice is found not in grand verdicts, but in simple truths. You deserved better than the lies that were stacked against you, Mrs. Aldridge." Vivian didn't dwell on the past, but it found subtle ways to revisit her. Her work with the charity flourished. What began as a modest support group for single mothers evolved into a robust nonprofit, offering legal aid, housing support, and emotional counseling. Her story gave the organization a face, but it was her empathy and quiet strength that gave it purpose. She spent hours listening to women who, like her, had once believed love would protect them from betrayal. They came to her unsure, broken. Vivian didn't lecture. She listened. She encouraged. She reminded them they had every right to stand tall, even when the world tried to pull them down. Through this work, she found her own reconciliation. Richard had become a quiet figure in her life. Their interactions now revolved around Sarah, whose joyful presence could soften even the most uncomfortable moments. Their co-parenting was structured, polite. There were school functions, shared birthday celebrations, and routine check-ins. One afternoon, Richard invited Vivian to meet for coffee to discuss a potential donation to her nonprofit. It was the first time in years they had spoken one-on-one outside legal arrangements or co-parenting logistics. He looked different, older, weary. The polished charm he used to wear like armor was gone. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about so many things." Vivian didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was space, a place where honesty could breathe. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard continued, "but I want to help, for Sarah, and for the women you're helping." His donation was generous, anonymous, just as Vivian requested. She didn't want his name tied to the foundation, but the gesture was still a quiet form of accountability. Vivian didn't feel anger in that moment. What she felt instead was an aching kind of calm, the strange stillness that comes not from resolution, but from finally putting down a burden too heavy to carry any longer. She felt release. Later that week, during a community dinner at the foundation, she shared with a small group of new clients, "You may not get the apology you deserve, but you can still build a life that no longer needs it." And she had. The memories no longer held power over her. They had become bricks in the path that brought her here, stronger, freer, and at peace. Her past wasn't erased. It was repurposed, not as pain, but as a platform to lift others. Time had softened the sharp edges of her pain. The public chaos of her divorce, the confrontations, the humiliation, they had once consumed her. Now they no longer defined her. Slowly, she was learning to live beyond the wreckage. Her days were full, busy, but meaningful. Raising Sarah, now a spirited toddler, brought unexpected joy. Mornings filled with laughter and spilled cereal, afternoons became gentle walks through their neighborhood park. Vivian found peace in the rhythm. She would pause sometimes during those walks, watching Sarah chase pigeons or tug at flowers, and feel a lump rise in her throat, not from sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude that somehow, despite everything she had come through, with her spirit intact. It wasn't the life she once imagined inside the Aldridge estate, but it was real and honest. Her heart, once shattered, was mending, not through dramatic romance or fairy tale love, but small acts of rebuilding. She began to form friendships with other women through her nonprofit, women who had endured abandonment, legal battles, financial strain. They bonded with Vivian not because she was once wealthy, but because she had endured and emerged stronger. She wasn't just a name on a board. She was someone who had walked through the fire and survived. Romance wasn't a priority, but Vivian didn't close herself off. She met a few kind men, single fathers, volunteers, professionals from fundraising events, but she was cautious. She'd learned to pay attention to what wasn't said, to stop ignoring red flags, to stop shrinking herself to make others comfortable. There were nights she lay awake wondering if she could ever fully trust again, not just another person, but her own heart. And yet, she never let that doubt turn into fear. When people asked if she was dating again, Vivian only smiled. Her life was already full. Sarah was thriving. Her work made a difference, and her soul was steady. Sometimes, late at night, as Sarah slept curled beside her in their warm suburban home, Vivian would reflect. She thought of the girl she once was, the young woman who believed marriage and legacy were built on unshakable vows. That version of herself no longer existed. In her place stood a woman, stronger, wiser. While love might return one day, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. She would never again lose herself for someone else's affection. She had reclaimed her identity, not as a betrayed wife, not as a scandal, not as a case study, but as a mother, a builder, a survivor. And if someone came along one day, not to rescue her or possess her, but simply to walk beside her, she would be ready. Until then, she had everything she needed. in her arms, in her heart, in the quiet, unwavering strength she had earned. Years had passed, but the echoes of that courtroom question still followed her. Have you confirmed through official medical records that Richard Aldridge is indeed the father? Or, for that matter, that you are actually pregnant at all? Judge Delgado's words had sliced through the noise like a scalpel, cutting spectacle from truth. That moment wasn't just the turning point in the trial. It had been the turning point in Vivian's entire life. She had walked into that courtroom the pregnant wife, betrayed, exhausted, humiliated. But she walked out something else entirely. She walked out of that courtroom as something more. A symbol of quiet resilience and enduring strength. In the years that followed, people still murmured about the scandal. The tabloid headlines faded, but among the elite, the story became something of modern folklore, about the mistress who mocked and the wife who stood tall when it mattered. But for Vivian, it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming herself. She didn't pursue interviews. She didn't seek to disgrace Marissa or Richard. She funneled her energy into something meaningful, building an organization that offered legal and emotional support for women facing similar storms. Her journey became a case study in resilience, not because she shouted her story, but because she lived it, truthfully and unapologetically. Whenever she was invited to speak, Vivian chose her words carefully. What saved me, she once said at a forum on women's rights, wasn't my last name or my bank account. It was a single question, a demand for proof. Sometimes justice is just that simple. Those words echoed. Lawyers quoted her. Advocates cited her. Survivors nodded silently. Her dignity, even in the darkest moments, reminded everyone that truth didn't need theatrics to be powerful. As for Richard, he lived with the weight of his choices. Though they co-parented Sarah with civility, their exchanges were functional. Vivian didn't expect more. What would have broken her years ago now barely registered. And Marissa Langford? She vanished. A former icon of scandal, now nothing more than a faded headline. A few gossip blogs tracked her sporadically, but her notoriety dimmed. Vivian never saw her again. But that moment, the question remained. It was taught in law school. It appeared in divorce blogs. It reminded people, lies don't need to be shouted down. They only need to be met with facts. For Vivian, it marked the turning point. The clearest evidence that truth, spoken plainly, could dismantle even the most polished facade. She had faced betrayal, she had stared down shame, and in doing so she had become what Marissa never could. Someone truly respected, truly free. 5 years had passed since Vivian Aldridge had stepped out of that courtroom with her dignity intact and her unborn daughter safe in her womb. Now known simply as Vivian, she stood on stage at her nonprofit's annual gala. The auditorium shimmered under soft lights, packed with guests from every walk of life. Wealthy donors, hopeful single mothers, fellow survivors. Dressed simply, but with grace, her hair pulled back, Vivian radiated calm assurance, the quiet strength of a woman who had rebuilt everything from ashes. She took a breath, smiled, and began to speak. Not with anger or sorrow, but with clarity and purpose. I once thought betrayal would break me, Vivian said, her voice steady and clear. But pain doesn't define us. How we rise from it does. She didn't speak of lawsuits or headlines. She spoke of resilience, of the courage it takes to keep going when everything around you crumbles. She spoke of worth, of how the most devastating truths can reveal the deepest parts of who we are. Her voice flowed through the auditorium like a balm on old wounds. When she concluded, a wave of applause rolled through the room. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to us is the beginning of who we're meant to become. In the front row, 5-year-old Sarah beamed up at her mother, eyes wide with pride. Beside her sat Eleanor Aldridge, a bit older now, composed as ever, dabbing away tears. Even Richard stood, joining the standing ovation, no longer the figure at the center of scandal, but a quiet father, shaped by time and consequence. Vivian's journey had taken her from devastation to grace, from heartbreak to purpose. So that's how the story ends. And wow, what a journey it's been. If you're still here, still watching, still feeling, then something in this story touched you. Maybe it echoed a pain you've carried. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength. Either way, I see you, and I'm glad you're here. Vivian's story isn't just about betrayal or scandal or courtroom drama. It's about transformation. She walked through the fire, And she didn't just survive, she rebuilt. With grace, with purpose. There's a powerful Stoic quote by Marcus Aurelius that fits her journey perfectly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Vivian didn't run from her pain. She used it, turned it into something that could lift others. That's healing. That's strength. And here's the truth. We all face moments that threaten to break us. But what matters isn't the betrayal. It's who we become after. So maybe you're watching this and thinking, I've been there. Or maybe you're in it right now. Maybe you're rebuilding too. Just know you're not alone. Like Vivian, you can rise. You can rewrite your story. If this story touched your heart, if you saw even a sliver of yourself in it, then do me one favor. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that speak to the deepest parts of us. Because healing isn't just about moving on, it's about moving forward. Together. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Until next time, take care of your heart, trust your truth, and never let someone else's lies define your worth.